Awesome. Here we go. All right, looks like we're live now. Hi, everyone. This is Achuta Bava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to talk about the major astrology of 2021. This is the second part of a two-part series I started yesterday. The first part of this series, we took a look at Jupiter, Uranus, and Saturn and their contacts throughout the year ahead. Today, we are going to take a look at the eclipses of 2021. And we are also going to take a look at Jupiter's temporary ingress into Pisces. So the Jupiter ingress into Pisces, we're going to take through the 12 signs. So you can stick around to see how that Jupiter ingress is going to impact your rising sign or your sun sign, depending on what kind of horoscope you like to use every month. And we're going to refresh on the meaning of the eclipses, which I've already looked at a number of times in the past since the nodes of the moon change signs into Sagittarius and Gemini. But we'll sort of refresh again today on those eclipses, when they're happening, what you can expect, and so forth. So all of that being said, I want to say Happy New Year to everybody. I hope you guys had a nice New Year's Eve and that you enjoyed some time, hopefully with family or friends. It was nice to be able to reflect with my girls and my wife last night. We sat down and we had a fire and we kind of sat and talked about what the year had, what we had learned from the year, and what we were looking forward to for this year, and just ritualizing that moment together as a family, and or if you can with friends, or today if you can ritualize the moment somehow with even journaling or taking a little time out for yourself. I recommend it. This holiday comes right on the right after the winter solstice, which is a turning point in the solar year. It's obviously a moment that we mark off in our calendars, but it's closely aligned with the traditional winter solstice. So it's a nice moment, regardless of where you're at in the world, to ritualize the occasion, and to think about lessons learned and things that we are going to continue working on or hoping for or dreaming about in the year ahead. So where are you all coming from, by the way, as you're coming in? I see people are sort of streaming in. I see from Canada and Colorado. I always like to hear where you guys are coming in from. So feel free to write into the chat box about where you're coming from. Before I dive in today, I want to remind everybody that it is the last 24 hours of my Kickstarter. We have 22 hours left to go before the Kickstarter is done. And we have so far rallied the support of 1,249 backers. That is absolutely amazing. And thanks to all of you guys for the support. I'm seeing people now coming in a little bit more. Charleston, South Carolina, Nevada, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, boring old Pennsylvania. Well, I'm sure it's not that boring. Is it? I don't know. Any place you're at long enough feels boring, I guess. Oregon, North Germany, Mongolia. Is that real? Wow. Maryland, Detroit, Michigan, Texas. Nice. Charlotte, North Carolina. So last 24 hours of my Kickstarter, and I want to one more time today just tell you about how to donate if you are able to support. The link is in the live stream chat right now. It'll be in the description of this video. Like I said, we have 22 hours left to go. 1,249 backers. The support that we've raised has been unbelievable, completely unprecedented. Thank you guys so much. I want to show you two things that you can get when you pick up a reading. As one of the rewards, we offer the deep dive into the astrology of 2021. And when you do that, you also get this really cool calendar that we made that gives you a guide to interpretation. You have a key for all of the planets, all of the different aspects and their meanings: new moons, full moons, lunar, solar eclipses. some examples about how to blend and match the significations of the planets with the aspects, and some recommended journaling practices for the year. And then we have a calendar of all the major events of the year, most of which I cover in my deep dive into 2021, which is one of the reward tiers when you donate. If you donate, I think it's at the $100 level. You can also get a deep dive into your sun or rising sign horoscope for the entire year of 2021. And in addition to this little calendar, which we toss into that, you will also get a calendar for the ruling planet of your rising sign for the year. So some really cool rewards that my personal assistant Delia and my other assistant Nanice made. I kind of said, hey, could we make something like this? And they were like, we can do it. And then they just did it. It's awesome. So I will put the link one more time in 24 hours left. Remember, you can also save half off, 50% off all of my courses, my year 1 Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic course, my year 2 course, my Horary course, and my wife's Herbal Apprenticeship course. They're all there in the rewards section. Biggest discount of the year that we run on them. So that's it. 22 hours left. All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's dive into the astrology for today. I'm going to put the real-time clock up on the screen, and we'll dive in. So here we go. All right. So let's go through the eclipses first. The eclipses, there are 4 of them that we're going to take a look at. And the eclipses happen in May and June, and then November and December. So we'll hop forward to May of 2021. And let's take a look. Here we go. I'm going to go back to May 26th. So on May 26th, you're going to see a lunar south node lunar eclipse in Sagittarius. Now, the upside of these south node eclipses in Sagittarius is that in general, south node eclipses with Sagittarius can be very philosophical, very spiritual, and very otherworldly. The reason for that is you're talking about the south node, which tends to be about otherworldliness and detachment from materiality, either in positive or negative sense. You can have meditation or you can have heroin. You know, it can, so just like give you some extremes. But the south node tends to be about detachment from worldly pursuits, and they may be more like spiritual pursuits or aversion to material things. Or also the south node can be associated with material loss or decay or degeneration or decline. And when you have that kind of eclipse happening in the sign of Sagittarius, you're really thinking about, with Jupiter as the ruling planet, you're thinking about teachers and teachings, beliefs and education, and anyone or anything that can help you connect to your spiritual life or spiritual practices. All of that could be amplified by a south node eclipse in Sagittarius. So that's kind of the positive. The other thing about this eclipse is that at that time, Jupiter will be in a very strong position in its own sign of Pisces temporarily. So this stands to be a what I would say is a more truly Jupiterian kind of eclipse. And you want to really look at the place of Sagittarius in your birth chart by whole sign to get a feeling for what that might mean. That eclipse, lunar eclipses bring endings. So you're thinking of resolution or completion. Now, we'll be spending a lot more time in the spring looking at this eclipse, and we'll run it through all the houses at that point in time. But that's your first eclipse. The next eclipse is going to come on June 10th. On June 10th, we have a solar eclipse in Gemini. And this one is with the North Node while Mercury is retrograde and basically cazimi at the exact same time. This is a very powerful moment of resetting and recalibrating around the Gemini area of your birth chart, whatever whole sign house Gemini is in. For example, if let's just say you have it in your 10th house of career, that eclipse lands in your 10th house of career, then you might be seeing a pretty deep reset, and kind of the general idea of a solar eclipse is going to be like any new moon, that it's a new beginning. But this one is very powerful, and its effects and what it's introducing will last for a very long time. And it's much more pivotal than your typical new moon. So I like to think of them as like new moons on steroids. The Mercury retrograde signature suggests that this is some kind of revision or change that's being made that will last a very long time as well, that it represents a kind of revisionary beginning. So that has there's a specific meaning to that one that, again, we'll be unpacking in the spring. Now, one thing that you can do with the eclipses is to go back and watch the eclipse cycles. So let's go back to the last time that these planets were in Sagittarius and Gemini, because sometimes you're going to see some overlying or overlapping symbolism. So it was around February of 2011 that the north node of the moon went into the sign of Sagittarius. I use the mean nodes as my measurement. So it's around February 2011. Okay, well, if we move that forward just a bit, and we're going to see the eclipses are then starting, they get started when the nodes change signs. They start happening in those new signs. And that lasts us all the way into the summer of 2012. So you can look back at that time frame and say, okay, what was going on in my life around that time? Sometimes an exploration of that time period and the topics of the houses of Gemini and Sagittarius in your birth chart by whole sign are going to give you some insight as to, not only what's happening now and what topics are likely to be activated, but how they're connected to your recent history. I mean, it's 10 years ago, I guess, or so. It's 8 years, 9 years ago, but still, a lot to be gained by making comparisons between previous time periods. If you go back before that, you can trace it back further too. Let's just go back to one more prior to that. So if you go back even a little bit farther than that, you're going to see the nodes of the moon in the fall of 2001 entering Gemini and Sagittarius. And then they very slowly, oops, I'm moving by weeks. Let me speed it up to months. They very slowly move through, and you get eclipses in those signs, and they're going to change over by the spring of 2003. So always a good idea to look at the cycles in the past and see how you've grown. And if I like to think that there's some lessons that we learn, and then when the nodes come back, it's like, well, now did I really learn them, or am I going to have to go through some of the same things? And that really does happen with recurring eclipses. So it's worth it to look back at those time periods. Anyway, let's move forward to the end of the year, 2021, in November. Here's something really interesting that's happening. This happens, this is, it's a very common thing, but you're going to see right about the time when the nodes are changing signs. They're just about to change signs at the end of the year here into Scorpio and Taurus. We'll be doing later in the year, of course, we'll do quite a bit to explore the meaning of the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. But on November 19th, we have a full moon happening in Taurus, and you can see it's really close to the North Node in Gemini. So the eclipse is being formed out of sign. These eclipses are like little previews of the next eclipses to happen in the next signs. So you can look also at the Taurus Scorpio houses in your chart and think, okay, there's some pretty big changes that are going to start happening in those areas starting in 2022. And you're getting a little sneak preview of that through the whole sign house of Taurus in your birth chart at the very end of the year. But then to round out the year, we have one final eclipse in Sagittarius, and that eclipse is going to happen on December 4th. So here on December 4th, you can see one last big solar eclipse, new sort of new moon, new beginning. Interesting that it's with Mercury again. It's coinciding with a pretty close, sun's almost very recently conjoined with Mercury. It was the same thing that happened during the summer with the solar eclipse in Gemini. So now you're looking at that Sagittarian area, a South Node eclipse. And by contrast, by the way, I should step back a second and say that North Node eclipse in Gemini, you're thinking of a reset, kind of a revisionary reset. But the North Node usually is more about material ambitions, meaning the things that we're doing in the world, the storylines that we're invested in, the ambitions that we have, and the outcomes that we're hoping for in material circumstance, in material things. The South Node tends to be a little bit more otherworldly. So That North Node eclipse during the summer is probably going to be more about things like business, love, relationships, family, wherever it's landing in your chart, it'll be about more involvement in the world, not less. Whereas these South Node eclipses, especially this one in December, where you get the last solar eclipse in Sagittarius before the nodes change signs. And in Jupiter's sign, again, there's going to be this emphasis on things like beliefs, religion, knowledge, to some degree, our authority, our inner sense of authority, and what we believe is true or right or good. The kind of paradigm that we're living in, our beliefs or convictions get highlighted with the Sagittarian eclipses. So that'll come up at the very end of the year, December 4th. And again, look to the whole sign house of Sagittarius. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to do today was to talk a little bit about Jupiter's entrance into Pisces. It's a funny year for Jupiter because occasionally Jupiter will just blaze through it takes about a year for Jupiter to go through one sign, but occasionally it'll blaze through one sign really quickly. And then within the year, you're going to get kind of a double dipping where it's like, okay, I'm going to go into Pisces for a little bit. I'm going to be in Aquarius. I'm going to go into Pisces and I'm going to come back to Aquarius. So let's take a look at when that happens, and let's run it. We're going to run it through the 12 signs and just talk a little bit about it. So first of all, I'm going to actually eliminate everything on the screen that you're looking at except for Jupiter. So Jupiter is going to, like I said, it just really runs through through Aquarius really quickly, and then you're going to see it pop into Pisces. All right, I got to change my view here slightly. Apologize, guys. I have this set up from my horoscopes. Let's see here. Okay. There we go. So what I want to do now is I'm going to put Aries on the ascendant, and here's the time frame. May 14th, you're going to see Jupiter change into Pisces. Now, this is a really positive thing for Jupiter because Jupiter was in Capricorn, its fall, and then in Aquarius, Saturn sign, back to back being in Saturn sign. Now it's coming back into its own sign, which means that it's not being filtered through. You're not getting a Jupiter that's actually got like this underlying Saturnine quality. Now you have a Jupiter that's more naturally itself. It's like more, sort of typically Jupiterian. So now watch how this works. You're going to see Jupiter hang out in Pisces all the way through July, and it retrogrades. It's retrograding a little bit before that. Let's go back to the retrograde moment. So comes in May, and then you're going to see it station and turn retrograde right around the summer solstice. We're talking about June 21st into the 22nd. And then we go forward and into July, you're going to see that Jupiter retrogrades and goes back into Aquarius. And that is going to happen right about July 28th. So you have this period from mid-May through the end of July where it's like, welcome Jupiter in Pisces, a very like faithful, watery, uplifting, optimistic, sometimes almost exaggeratedly so, Jupiter. And that's going to mean something different for everybody. The first thing I'll say is that it's generally a good thing that Jupiter is in its own sign. So you're probably looking at more positive significations wherever it's landing in your chart. It's going to tend to bring out good Jupiterian things in that area of your life. So now, like I said, let's run it back and talk about where this is landing in your chart. Okay, so if you're an Aries rising, this little patch in 2021 is going to land Jupiter, or Aries sun or rising, you can use the same. It'll land in your 12th whole sign house. Now, normally, I would say like any planet going into your 12th house can be a little harrowing. The good thing about Jupiter in your 12th house is it often has to do with the recovery or restoration of faith that has been lost, or it has to do with redemption or being found when you feel other or alien or different. Suddenly you're found by a group, by friends, by faith, by hope. It also has a lot to do with charity, compassion, humanitarian work, the desire to help those who are suffering. So Jupiter in the 12th is like, bringing hope into dark places, or bringing order into places where there is some sense of chaos. There's also in the 12th an exploration on the more challenging side of the shadows of our faith or beliefs or convictions, if they are too fanatical, or if we tend toward um, delusional belief systems or something like that. There may be an exploration of the shadow of knowledge, teachers, teachings, authority, and some of those things can be there can be undermining influences that are Jupiterian in nature that we have to learn how to sort of weed out. So for Aries rising, those are some of the main themes that I'm looking at this year. If you roll it back to Taurus rising, you're going to see Jupiter in your 11th house. There is a really nice energy coming in around the topic of groups, communities, friends, allies, whether it's religious or spiritual, with Jupiter in the 11th, a pretty good chance that it could be, or educational or academic, teachers and community, friendships, allies, and a commonality of belief or vision for the future. This is a really nice place for Jupiter. It should bring some really good people or good, and it might be, could be very well just be that you're really enjoying being able to, by the middle of the summer or by sometime over the summer, perhaps starting to go back to, seeing people and being in public again for a lot of us. So those are some things to look for. On the shadow side, you can always have groups of people where the ideology is driving the discourse in a way that's like unhealthy or negative, or where there is some kind of over the top quality that you get lost in. It's always a possibility for Jupiter and Pisces. Now we go to Gemini rising. We're going to see this playing out in your career house. So if you're a Gemini rising, this is a period where you're getting a preview of some really big things that are coming for your career area of your chart in 2022. You're getting kind of a preview of it between May and July. And when Jupiter's in the 10th, usually there's going to be an expansion of work, authority, responsibility, fame or success or recognition. Also teachers, mentors, people that, or taking on that role yourself to be a teacher or a mentor. Of course, the question of power, authority, knowledge, beliefs, ideals within the workplace or within your work in the world can be, topic of conversation that's not always easy as well. So that's where it's heading if you're a Gemini rising. Now, if you are a Cancer rising, it's in your 9th house, and it has a lot to do with faith and beliefs, and this could be a religious, spiritual, or academic community kind of vibe, but also learning, perhaps traveling abroad, but it's a preview of something that's going to come on full strength in 2022 as well. I see a lot of people, Jupiter in the 9th, going back to school, finding teachers, mentors, spiritual guides, or spiritual practices, as well as sometimes taking really meaningful trips abroad. So those are some of the things that I would watch for there. Of course, again, the question about teachers and teachings and clarifying beliefs, truth from, say, Jupiter can be like a charismatic preacher in the 9th house, and you just have to make sure you're on the same page as that preacher and not getting taken in by something that doesn't really resonate for you. So let's move forward into Leo rising. Leo rising puts Jupiter in the 8th. This is like, you couldn't really ask for the most part, for a better Jupiter for a better planet to enter your 8th house, right? Because the 8th house can be very difficult. It's really, people talk about it with a lot of keywords that can be boiled down, like death, sex, all this stuff. Most of it's not so accurate insofar as the 8th house is really a place of the karmic debts and obligations that we have to other people or that they have to us. And usually there's a connotation of there being like penalty or owing something, like taxes or like loans and debts, but also those that other people have to us. The more positive attribute of this house is good things that come to us through other people, through the resources, assets, time, money, energy of others. It was called the esteem of others. So do people like you or not? Jupiter in the 8th can mean that you're being given something from other people, or that sometimes it can mean a big debt that's owed, or a big something that has to be given to somebody else, an obligation to somebody else. That's a lot. Jupiter is a lot. But it can also be some really joyful celebration of giving and of helping and of receiving support from others. A lot of people I've seen receive inheritance when Jupiter enters the 8th. Now, sometimes that's going to come with like maybe an older family member passing or something like that. But that theme of karmic bills that come due is part of the 8th. But when Jupiter's there, it's kind of like there's a silver lining that's going to ease that, or that's going to alleviate that difficulty, or what comes to you is somehow good, or what you're going to give to others is somehow good. The only thing to be careful of is not developing a martyr complex with Jupiter in the 8th, where you feel like your worth is based on how much you can give of yourself to others and be the helper, the giver, like that. If it goes too far, you might get burnt out, or you may find yourself in some kind of codependent situation that's not healthy. If you are a Virgo rising, let's back this up a little bit. Jupiter in Pisces will be in your 7th house of relationships. So marriage, relationships, sexuality. It's not uncommon for there to be a new relationship, or for a relationship to become more committed, to meet someone new. Sometimes I really rarely see Jupiter in the 7th resulting, unless it's a debilitated Jupiter, resulting in people splitting up. It usually has more to do with something expanding in the partner's life, like their career or their finances, or they're getting healthy again, or the relationship itself is growing in some way, or you're meeting somebody new, or maybe your sex life is improving somehow, or your dating life in general. There can be like almost romantic, or I would call romantic / sexual healing that happens when Jupiter's in a water sign in the 7th. It can result in pregnancy. The 7th house was traditionally associated with sex, and Jupiter in a fertile water sign in that 7th house can bring, it can rain relationships, and it can rain babies. So be careful about that if you're not planning for one. The other thing is that Jupiter in the 7th can be a signal of the entrance of the guru, or the teacher, or the sage, or sages, plural, or teachings that somehow enter your life and start reorienting your social experience. In that way, it's not totally different from Jupiter in the 9th or the 11th, where spiritual teachings of some kind and teachers can enter your life in a really powerful way, or Jupiterian figures in some way. And you have to be careful, because again, Jupiter in Pisces could be like a charismatic cult leader. So, make sure that you're being very discerning, but probably not. Probably a well-dignified Jupiter for most people is going to bring positive things into your life through relationships. Now, if we move this forward again to Libra rising, Jupiter is in the 6th. Now, the 6th was traditionally called the joy of Mars and the house of misfortune. It's associated with sickness, servitude, and slavery, as well as hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. And it was also associated with selfless service and sacrifice, as in the laying down of one's life for a cause, as in a soldier in like the army or something. So Jupiter in this house can be about putting our money where our mouth is. You know what I mean? Where we have to walk the talk, and we have to enact our faith or our beliefs in the world in tangible ways that are born of some degree of humility or self-sacrifice. The 6th house can be a very humiliating place, or it can be a very humbling place. And with Jupiter there's also a kind of a confidence and a faith, which is a nice mix. It has the feeling of someone who might take up a cause or a mission, or selfless care for others, like sort of charity, compassionate work. But there's going to be an edge to it. There's going to be a reason why you get into something like this, or why a cause becomes important to you. Or there's going to be something that you're working toward that you feel has redemptive value and is worth the sacrifice and difficulty. It's also a sign that like there may be difficulties, but through them is the development of knowledge, faith. Through them comes teachers and learning. Through them comes redemption. So I like this for Libras. It's not an easy year, but it will be uplifting with Jupiter. Not year, but an easy period of time, May to July, right? It's giving you a preview for what 2022 is going to be like. So let's move Scorpio into the ascendant. And when we put Scorpio in the ascendant, Jupiter goes into the 5th house. This is great. Again, like if you don't want to get pregnant, be careful, because this is such a pregnancy transit. Jupiter in a water sign in the 5th is very conducive to romantic affairs, creativity, love, pregnancy, children. It's a very joyous transit. It can also be about going over the top with something. Say, for example, gambling. Jupiter in the fifth can go to extremes in the name of pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure or happiness. But it's also genuinely where faith, knowledge, joy, and optimism come together with creativity and beauty and good fortune. So it's a really nice place to have Jupiter for the year. And a lot of the times when Jupiter's in the fifth, what I see, if someone is going to get pregnant, it's going to be a pretty joyous thing. Even like I can honestly say that, when I see sometimes people get pregnant, it's going to be Saturn in their fifth or Mars in their fifth or something when they get pregnant. And it's either the pregnancy or the circumstances have some elements of difficulty in them. And I'm typically, not always, but typically when Jupiter's in the fifth and a person gets pregnant, there's really a lot of joy behind the whole thing. And it can even see people through difficulties in terms of how they carry or getting their life set up for having a kid, or it just, for whatever reason, that Jupiter in the fifth tends to deliver a more joyful experience of pregnancy. Anyway, so let's go forward to Sagittarius on the ascendant. If you're a Sag rising, this little Jupiter period is going to land in your fourth house, which is home and family, parents, land, property, roots, and foundation. Really nice for building wealth, buying a home, setting aside money, investing money, possibly inheriting something from the family. It's also a good time for the expansion or growth of family. It's another one that you could see pregnancy through. It's also one where the idea of the family starting to develop like religious or spiritual rituals together, or the idea of religion in the family as a topic to be explored for better or worse, can come up. You're also going to see in general that you are more personally, attuned to the business of the home and family. Like it's like when Jupiter goes into that house, there's this sense of the importance. It carries a weight. Jupiter called the heavy one, the guru in Indian astrology. So it carries a weight. Family topics will become like weightier. The other thing is that Jupiter in the fourth, weirdly, I know this sounds strange, but Jupiter in the fourth sometimes does coincide with the passing or death of certain family members, usually, obviously, the older ones. And the reason for that is that you have to remember that Zeus in ancient astrology is the overseer of cosmic justice, and he is associated with the law, with karmic law. A lot of people think that's Saturn. It's not. In ancient astrology, it was Jupiter. And so Jupiter can actually coincide with in the fourth house with the justice that needs to take place around family or parents or family members. And that does include, we all have a karmic bill due in the form of our lives eventually. We're all going to die. That's one of the bills that we have due. So when Jupiter comes to the fourth, sometimes it brings that sense of karmic cosmic justice around to family members. Usually, Jupiter is going to reward us with abundance, but just never underestimate Jupiter's power to deliver, to restore some sense of cosmic balance or order, and it often does so. You will be shocked to see how often Jupiter is involved in the charts of death. So most people, I hope at some point I hope to do a talk on that, because it's really a stunning thing that most people don't know about Jupiter. I talk about it in my classes. All right, so let's go to Capricorn rising. If you're a Capricorn rising, we're putting this into your third house. Now, the best way to explain the third house is going to be in terms of if I work from home, so it's an easy sort of analogy for me. I work from home, and throughout my day, including my spiritual practices, preparing and making these talks, speaking with clients, hanging out with my kids, there's patterns of movement and activity all around my home. And there's something called the home, but then there's this kind of circumambulation of activity around it. And the third house really has to do with that place of constantly moving energy around the roots. That's why it's associated, for example, with journalism, where we recap what's happened around the city, around the world. We have this common space that we all live in, and then what's the news? What is the daily comings and goings in that place? That's the third house, which is also why it ends up getting sort of peripherally associated with things like siblings and neighbors who are also sort of spread out but share the same roots as we do. And it's also why you see, topics like short journeys and travel and the mind and communication, technology and media. What you're trying to get at is that kind of sphere of activity. When Jupiter enters that sphere of activity, there's a lot of learning, teachers, knowledge. There's a sense of bringing or restoring order to your everyday environment or getting more organized sometimes. Also, there's sometimes like the hand of the divine is going to sort of speak through that local environment. And so what I also want to say is that it's your local environment is going to be a bit more of a lightning rod for the oracle, for spirits and guides to kind of come through and talk to you. It's a very good year for dreams, the interpretation of dreams. The third house was associated with the moon and with divination in ancient astrology. The third house was called goddess. And it really has to do with this kind of almost like this psychic biomatrix of life that's always hustling and bustling around our roots. So when Jupiter comes in, you're bringing the sage, you're bringing the giver of knowledge, and a planet that has so much to do with faith and piety and order and so forth. So you kind of have that presence coming into your immediate sphere, occupying your mind, being a part of how you speak or teach or listen or communicate. So watch for that. All right, let's move into Aquarius. We put Aquarius on the ascendant and Jupiter's going into your second house. Now, that means that the topic of money, finances, income, and expenses are going to be impacted. And you're getting a preview again of what's coming during this May to July time for 2022. So, when Jupiter's in your second house, it's spend big, earn big. You can earn a lot more. You can catch windfalls, and even launch successful businesses or find success in your career or advancement or promotion. You can restore unity or order in your financial life by paying off debt. There can be a lot of really good things around money and finances. At the same time, what does Jupiter do? Likes to spend big. It can be a planet that inflates or exaggerates our desire for material things as well. In a sense, I like to think of, Jupiter is like the horn of plenty, the cornucopia, right? And the main thing is that if you remember that Jupiter in your second is there to bless you, but it's also, you keep the blessing to the degree that you pass it on when Jupiter's in the second house. The more you get hoardy and, kind of covetous and stuff like that, the more that Jupiter in the second seems to end up resulting in like big expenses or even big losses financially. It's a funny thing because most people would only read Jupiter in the second like sort of straight up positive, right? But there's that kind of other side to it. All right. So finally, if you're a Pisces rising, we're putting it in your first house. And congratulations, you've had Jupiter, moving through your chart for 12 years. And once every 12 years, your ruling planet comes back to your home sign. And it's for me, whenever, the Jupiter return happens in your chart, wherever it is, or when it comes back to that first house, if you were born with it in the first, or if you're, in this case, if you're a Pisces rising, there's such a moment of personal renewal of faith, renewal of direction, a renewal of your sense of meaning and direction in life. And it's sometimes, especially after coming out of the 12th house, where we can feel like we're wandering or we're in no man's land a little bit, comes into the first, and it's a birthing moment, but it's also a restoration of faith, a sense of your purpose and direction in life overall. It can also coincide with eating too much or sort of putting on weight and overdoing things or getting high on yourself, which is not so good. But for most people, like I'd say 90% of my clients, when Jupiter comes around, it's a year of personal renewal, excitement, enthusiasm, a sense of getting, what's that movie, Stella got her groove back or whatever. It's kind of like that. Like you've got your groove back. And especially again, for the past year or so, and this is by 2022 now we're talking about, you're going to have patches of Jupiter and Saturn in your 12th house where you might be laboring with something and sorting through what influences or what aspects of your own psyche are helpful or which are undermining you in some way. So Jupiter coming into the first can be really clarifying and uplifting. I also see, I mean, it's true, sometimes people sort of balloon out and eat way too much and stuff like that when Jupiter comes into the first, but I often see people getting on new health regimens or just sort of feeling together again. It's like the bestower of cosmic order has come back to your first house, the place of self and identity and health and body. So I really like Jupiter in the first house for Pisces this year. All right, so that is Jupiter through the 12 signs. I hope that you have been enjoying this. I am going to close it down a little early today. And I thank you so much for everything that you guys have given me in the last year. I'm so excited for a new year together, hanging out, talking astrology all year. Remember that there are just 24 hours left in my Kickstarter. Here's the link in the comments section. And you have 24 hours left to save on all my programs for 2021. You can use the tuition that you pick up half off through my Kickstarter for my spring programs or my fall programs. If you end up not being able to make them, you can carry that forward. And also, don't forget that you can pick up a deep dive into the astrology of 2021 or your sun and rising sign horoscope for the whole year ahead when you donate. It comes with those cool calendars. So that's it. I hope that you guys have a very blessed day. I'm very fortunate to get to, like I said, to get to hang out with all of you, and really looking forward to a big, awesome year ahead. Hopefully a lot better than 2020 was. There were so many blessings in 2020, but it was a really difficult year.